The views and opinions expressed in the following program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of KSMQ Public Service Media Incorporated or its assigns.
Hi, I'm Dan Hoffman. Welcome to Farm Connections. On today's show, we get another engaging story from JoAnn Lauer about a harrowing experience her father had in the field. Mike Juntinen from Gold Cross joins me to talk about farm safety. And he's going to give us some helpful demonstrations of first aid that can save a life. Stay with us. Farm Connections is next.
Welcome to Farm Connections with your host, Dan Hoffman.
Farm Connections on KSMQ is brought to you in part by Primrose Retirement Communities in Austin and Mankato. Primrose, a provider of independent and assisted living, is a proud sponsor of Farm Connections. Primrose, this is living. Task AgriPlan Now is an employee benefit program that enables family farmers to take federal, state, and self-employment tax deductions on health insurance premiums and out-of-pocket expenses. AgriPlan Now is a proud partner of Farm Connections. Will Mahler, the Ag Attorney, has been representing dairy farms in Minnesota, Iowa, and Wisconsin for more than 38 years. Will Mahler, the Ag Attorney's office is in Rochester, and Will, a proud partner of Farm Connections. Thanks, Will Mahler.
Also brought to you in part by Absolute Energy, a locally owned facility producing 115 million gallons of ethanol every year, proudly supporting local economies in Iowa and Minnesota. Absolute Energy, adding value to the neighborhood.
Contrary to the popular image of fresh air and peaceful surroundings, a farm is not a hazard-free work setting. Every year, thousands are injured and hundreds die in farming accidents. Today, we hope to give you some ideas and techniques to keep your farm a safe one. Mike Juntinen from Gold Cross is my guest. Welcome, Mike.
Hey, thanks for having me, Dan.
Well, and thanks for joining us. We'd like to know a little bit about your work and what you do.
Sure. I've been a paramedic now for about 11 years. I live in Albert Lea. I've been working over there those 11 years, and recently I started working in Austin as well. I'm also currently the supervisor for those two sites. And on top of that, I'm a board member for the Southern Minnesota Regional Trauma Advisory Committee.
Well, those are important jobs and important things for our society and our community. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
What's the most difficult part of that job?
You know, sometimes it's the most exciting part, but the difficult part is, you know, seeing people who have been hurt, injured, having a tough time getting through those things.
Are there any specific seasons or times of the year where there's more accidents than others? You
know, just in my experience, I think we see a little bit more in the fall than we do in the spring, especially when it's farming related. Even outside of the farming areas and stuff, I want to say fall, we usually see a bit more injury than we do in the rest of the season.
There's more traffic on the road with grain hauling, machinery, combines, tractors moving through the fields and moving through the roadways. Any tips on when you see farm equipment on the road for preventing an accident or a problem?
You know, the thing that I always say to do foremost is look out for your own safety. So, you know, make sure if you're going to be passing one of those vehicles that you give that vehicle enough room when you're going around it. Make sure you don't have any oncoming traffic. Don't try to race around it or try to hurry up and get there. Make sure that you have that clearance. Make sure that, you know, everything's going to be safe for you when you go around that. If you're safe for yourself, the others will be safe that are on the road with you.
Great tips. When I see a combine on the road or a large piece of farm equipment, I think, can they see me? So when you get to the farm sites, there's some things like silos, grain bins, manure pits. Have you found any situations where they have caused some safety issues?
You know, over the years I've seen a lot of injuries in a lot of different places on the farm. Most of the time it can be random on where it is, but it usually has something to do with somebody trying to hurry through something or cut a safety corner. Almost every time it has something to do with that.
Well, thinking about manure pits, where as we agitate the manure in there and get the nutrients mixed and put it out on the field, there's certainly some gases that come off that are dangerous. So what would be some advice to a farm family about those gases in the building and the pit?
You know, it kind of comes down to the same thing we talked about with driving. Look out for your own safety first. So if you notice that smell, or you know that it's not a good area, make sure it's well ventilated. Make sure that fans are going if it's available in those areas. Pass that, get some of that harmful gas smell thing out of that area, so that it's safe for you, because you need enough oxygen to stay awake. So if it's iffy, don't go in it.
Good point. In some of those situations, the gases are actually explosive. So I'm hoping that farm families post the signs when they're aerating to keep people out of the building. But if you see somebody that's succumbed to gases laying in a building or laying in a pit, what should you do? Should you jump in with all efforts and go after that person?
That's a really good point. One thing that we see the most common is that first responders, a lot of times the first ones on scene, it could be family members, it could be trained professionals. They want to rush in to help that person. And the last thing you want to do is get that tunnel vision. You got to look out for the safety side. So if you see somebody down, you have to wonder, why are they down? So you don't want to rush into another area where it's anhydrous, or it could be a plethora of things that have caused them to go unresponsive, and you don't want to end up being another victim sitting right next to them.
But let's say somebody's really interested in prevention. Where can they get safety training or more information?
I've taken some training classes through Riverland in the past. They've got some great stuff. You can do some great first aid training through the Red Cross. There's a few different agencies out there. Really, if you reach out to some of those people in your community and say, where can I get this? There'll be something out there.
Let's say a citizen calls 911. What's the average response time from the time the dispatcher receives that call to the time the help can arrive?
Well, within the city, I'm most familiar with Albert Lee and Austin in our areas. I think our average response time is somewhere between 6 to 8 minutes. You start getting out into more rural Minnesota, and it could be anywhere up to 10, 12 minutes. A lot of those areas, we've got good first responder systems in all those areas. You should get help within 10 to 12 minutes usually.
Which is very efficient. However,
that is good response times, but there's still, if you have a major bleed, if you have a big deep cut or other injury, you can bleed out really quick from an arterial bleed. So getting that stopped and controlled as quickly as possible is going to be the #1 fix.
And with a response time somewhere between 6 and 12 minutes, which again is very efficient, you talked about preventing the bleed out. Do you have any equipment or any methods you can share with us to help that?
Yeah, we do a few different things. The basic steps for controlling bleeding is direct pressure. Doesn't even have to be with a bandage. It could be with your bare hand or a gloved hand, hopefully a gloved hand if you have it. Some gauze, a t-shirt, things like that all work well if that's what you have available, but you want to get direct pressure on that wound as quickly as possible. Another good idea, elevate that limb. If it's a limb, you want to elevate it, get it above the level of the heart. That's going to also help control that bleeding. If that doesn't work, then we start moving into some extra tools. We've got things like tourniquets that we can carry. The commercial available tourniquets, substantially more effective than a homemade tourniquet. Other than that, we also have some other bleeding control bandages that are out there. We carry quick clot and stuff on our ambulances. We've got it on a lot of the other first responder rigs that are in the area. And those help clot blood at the site.
I noticed you brought some of these things with.
I did.
Can you show those and tell a little bit more about those?
So the quick clot gauze, this is a pretty neat device that is out there. These are commercially available. There's a few different brands. But with these, they've got a substance in there that helps promote clotting. You really don't notice the difference. It looks like a regular bandage. But in the fiber is this powder. And that powder helps clot blood. This is one thing that we actually put into a wound. So normally you come on bleeding and we're just going to say, hey, take some 4x4s, take a gloved hand, whatever, and go right onto it. And we're just going to cover that with direct pressure. If you're going to use something like these bandages that help clot blood, this you're actually going to kind of shove into the wound. So if you've got a deep cut here on your arm and it's, let's say it's a 1/2 inch deep, we want to get this pushed into it and right at the site of the bleeding. And then once that's in there, Then we can kind of use the rest of the roll if we have more and just kind of cover it over the top and keep that pressure. It takes about 3 to 5 minutes to work, but it's going to clot that blood right at the site. They're very effective. And if nothing else, it's still a direct pressure over the top, so you haven't lost anything.
And you took it out of a sealed package, so this is something that would be in a toolbox or a combine or a tractor cab?
Yep, great in any type of first aid kit that you carry. Fairly small. They're meant to be, portable, and they're meant to be used in the field. That's what they're designed for.
And you also mentioned the Tourniquet?
The Tourniquet. So, commercially available again. You can Google for tourniquets, or whatever web search you want to use. Also available though at a lot of the same places you can find the Quick Clot gauze. Look for it in the first aid sections. They come in different colors. We carry orange because it's really visible. We like it to be visible in case when we hand off care to the next step, they see bright things that are there. But these tourniquets are pretty wonderful. As you can see, it gets pretty big. The version that we have here kind of velcros around, but you can get this around a leg pretty easily if you need to tourniquet a leg. But if you need to do an arm, you can undo the velcro or just go right over the arm and get this up and on the arm. Velcro it down tight. Now ideally, we want to have this about 2 inches above a wound. The only things that you don't want to be over is a joint, so I don't want to be on the elbow, and I don't want to be on a broken bone, because that can cause some damage too. But if you had a deep cut here on your arm, I want to be 2 inches above it, just not on a joint.
And quite snug.
So I snug this down. It just needs to be snug to start with, but then we have this little, they call it a windlass, but it just turns, and I can crank it. It's going to get tighter and tighter. Normally, it takes about 5 to 7 turns, especially on a leg, to really get it tight enough. If I go to about 3, it's going to cause you some pain. So it gets snug, but I'll do about 2 here. Let me know if it hurts. But once that's on, we're just going to put that into there. We only need to tighten it until bleeding's controlled. Once that's on, we want to make sure they get to a level 1 trauma center. Get to a trauma center as quickly as possible.
Well, it definitely put the pressure on.
I'm sure you can feel it.
Very effective. You mentioned broken bones or potentially a broken bone. Do you have splints or something portable that you can carry with?
Yeah, we started carrying these kind of pliable splints. We've had these on the ambulances for a few years. In the past, we used to have these pre-formed splints. They take up a lot of space, they're big, and if you need to use it, the patient needs to fit into the limb, or into the splint.
Show me.
So with this, I can unroll this, and the best part is it's got this thin metal in it to help form it, so I can bend it and ply it however I need to, and it'll stay, but it also doesn't show up on an x-ray. So if I send somebody to the hospital with this, they can go right to radiology and not have to worry about it. So let's say we're going to splint this arm. I can actually start off with this rolled up at the end. I can place that right in the palm of your hand. Gives you something to hold on to. This can come up here and kind of be rolled so that it stays firm. And so now I've got the shape and we've got this splinted. So
much support.
Yeah, so then I can just take some gauze, wrap that around, and you've got yourself a splint. The one thing to keep in mind is you want to splint both the joint above and below wherever the injury is. So in this case, you can see we've only splinted the joint below. So in the end, I would also have to have this into your body, and I would have to splint around, or you take another piece of gauze and go over your shoulder and around your arm. But it gives you the basic idea of how we would at least do some splinting quick. And if your arm wasn't in the position it should be in, I can form this splint to that position, which is really nice, which is something we couldn't do with old splints.
Great technology.
Yeah.
Let's say somebody comes upon an accident scene. Sometimes they're going to ask themselves the question, I'm not really qualified or trained in this area. Are there any laws that apply to this?
Yeah, there is a Good Samaritan law. The Good Samaritan law is basically written so that if you are helping somebody in good faith, so I pull up on a car accident, I pull up on a farm and see somebody injured, and I go to help them, as long as I'm doing things in good faith, I'm going to be covered, even if that results in further injury.
Common sense, prevention, and education.
Yep.
Mike, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate you joining us today.
Hey, thanks.
Stay with us. Storyteller JoAnn Lauer joins us next with a riveting tale. We're here with JoAnn Lauer, a wonderful storyteller. And JoAnn, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dan. Nice to be here.
Well, we're so glad to have you here. You're a great storyteller, and I understand you've got a story to tell us today. Is that true?
I do.
The Hands of the Farmer by JoAnn Lauer.
My grandpa Ostrander farmed 2 miles south of Buffalo Center. But sometimes I wonder if maybe he was a writer, too. He always made his Thanksgiving blessing sound just a bit like a poem. This particular Thanksgiving, we sat around the long table, aunts, uncles, cousins, clasping hands, as Grandpa stood to say the prayer. For the sweet smell of the soft earth, for fat, ripe ears of corn, and for the hands around this table that have brought in this year's good harvest, we thank you. He glanced around the table and paused at the empty spot right there between Mom and me. And bless my firstborn son, who because of this harvest is fighting for his life today. Bring him back to us. Grandpa finished the prayer and carved the turkey in silence. As Grandma passed around that huge bowl of steamy riced potatoes with a little lake of butter in the top. Grandma's Thanksgiving table. White linen napkins, her best china, silver, crystal. And in the center of the table, a large bouquet of yellow mums. Everything looked so beautiful, but nothing felt beautiful on this day. You see, a couple of weeks before, my dad had been out picking corn. Cold, gray November day. The picker plugged again for the 3rd time that morning. Dad put the Oliver 88 into idle. He stepped down from the tractor, walked to the back of the corn picker. If he could just pull out some of those stalks, allowing the rest to go through, when the snapping rollers grabbed his right hand and swallowed his arm all the way up to his shoulder. The tractor motor killed. Pain. If only he could reach his jackknife in his back pocket. If he really wanted to cut off that pain. A couple of hours later, the neighbor helping Dad return to the field and found him broken, bleeding, and unconscious. That's when all the craziness began. Pounding on the door, someone running in to use the phone, an ambulance siren. No one ever heard an ambulance siren in Buffalo Center, Iowa. And then they took my dad away. What did it mean, hospital? What did it mean, that word, die? I was terrified. I was terrified. I was 3 years old. My mom that morning had just told me that pretty soon I was going to have a brand new baby brother or sister, and we were so excited. We were doing a little dance in the middle of the kitchen floor. But now she couldn't stop crying. My grandpa came, and he drove Mom in his big black Buick to that hospital in Mason City. And there, at the tender age of 3, that day, I was about to learn how it is that farm families come together in time of crisis. My Aunt Marlis came. Well, little Miss JoAnn, she said, "Do you have a suitcase?" "No." "Well," she said, "then this paper bag will have to work." And we gathered my clothes, and she took me home with her. My Aunt Marlos is a school teacher in a one-room country school. She took me to school with her every day, and I did what every good little 3-year-old does at a country school. I graded papers and took naps on desks. She couldn't keep me forever. So my next aunt from Buffalo Center came, my Aunt Dorothy. Yes, she came to take me home with her. My Aunt Dorothy has 3 boys. I don't know anything about boys. And she made them eat their peas. Oh dear, what if she made me eat mine? Thankfully, my Aunt Dorothy couldn't keep me too long. And then came my Aunt Ines. She taught me little girl songs and little girl stories. But all I wanted was to be back home with my own mom and dad. Harvest season passed. An entire year rolled around. And there we were again at Grandpa and Grandma Ostrander's Thanksgiving table. Uncles, aunts, wiggly cousins in assorted sizes, turkeys, riced potatoes, homemade breads and jams and jellies, and plum pudding, the best thing to come out of my grandma's kitchen, her plum pudding with a buttery lemon sauce drizzled over the top. Clasping hands, Grandpa stood to say the prayer. For the sweet smell of the soft earth, for fat, ripe ears of corn, and for the hands around this table that have brought in the best harvest ever, we thank you. Grandpa looked around the long table and glanced over at me. There I was. I was 4 years old this year. What a big girl. And there sat my mom, holding my little baby brother Jimmy in her lap. And between us, yes, between us, sat my dad, still with 2 hands and 2 arms to hug me. Many Thanksgivings have come and gone since that one, but never one so filled with love and thankfulness. It's called Hands of the Farmer.
JoAnn, thank you so much for joining us on Farm Connections.
Thank you, Dan.
And telling us a great story.
Thank you.
Stay tuned for more Farm Connections coming up next.
I'm Tyler Amick from Enterprise 4-H Club here in Manure County. Well, I've been in 4-H for 13 years now. I started out as a clover bud. When I was 5 years old, my mother was the club leader, and so I kind of got involved on that end. And she just encouraged me to keep with it. And so I just kept on doing projects, getting involved until I hit about 7th, 8th grade when I really got involved with leadership areas within 4-H. You know, I've done so much with 4-H and I'm immensely grateful. Well, after 7th grade, I was eligible to join the Manure County 4-H Ambassador team, which was kind of my first touch with leadership, my first taste of it. I continued working with them, and I got involved with the Manure County Advisory Board as secretary initially, and I also explored roles as youth treasurer, youth at large, vice president, eventually president. So then that ended up guiding me towards the state ambassador program, the Minnesota 4-H State Ambassadors. I've served with them for over a year now. I'm a second year. I've also done a lot of work in various aspects, such as with the poultry area. I recently ran and got crowned as the Minnesota Poultry Prince with 4-H and Golden Plump. And so I've done a lot of ambassador work with that, representing the poultry industry and the poultry project. And it's been really great, the opportunities. I live on a small hobby farm outside of Austin. I raise rabbits and chickens, horses. We have barn cats, lots of barn cats. But I really work with them a lot, and it's kind of helped me develop a responsibility towards animals, and I really love working with animals now. I'm studying at Wartburg College right now to triple major in history, world history, secondary education, and American history, secondary education. And when I graduate, I hope to become a high school teacher here in Austin. I don't think that there's one single value that 4-H can give you. Whatever you put in, you get out tenfold. I never imagined that I'd be able to get the opportunities I have and to be able to excel and meet all these great people from around the county and the state and the nation. It's absolutely wonderful. The ability to learn who you are and learn what you can do is probably the best part of 4-H.
Thanks for joining us today. I wish you a safe and productive year. I'm your host, Dan Hoffman. See you next time on Farm Connections.